All right, so we're moving on to the next presentation, and it's by Info Exchange Limited, my company, or the company that I represent. Info Exchange is a leading IT consulting and services firm. We are proud to announce that this year, Info Exchange is celebrating 25 years of operations, serving both the private and the public sector. And our goal is to help our clients improve their operational efficiencies and to shore up their security posture, so that their company is able to respond quickly and safely to changes that are happening in the market. And you know that today with COVID is a great example of how things are changing very, very quickly, and companies have been challenged as to how they can now, adjust accordingly. And of course, with the ultimate goal of them achieving exponential growth. Our next speaker, David Allen, is the co-founder. He's at the helm of this organization. He's a co-founder and the CEO. He has over 3 decades of experience within the IT field. And over the last quarter century, it feels good to say that, he has grown Info Exchange to be a leader in software-defined infrastructures such as HCI and SD-WAN, and of course, the work from anywhere operations. I know he has a lot to say, so I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm handing it over to David. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Anne-Marie. Thanks for that. And Roderick, thanks to our great opening batting, you score enough boundary. So,
thank you, David. Thank you.
I'm going to try to rack up some more runs for the team. We've been saying for a long time that company boards and C-suites need to rethink their present environment, certainly in relation to the value of the information in their care, as well as the potential risk that it carries. So I'm really very encouraged today to see the number of participants that have come in from business leadership. But to really address this issue of data privacy and security, one really needs to start by understanding the nature of the problem and how we got here. Because a lot of these things that we've been talking about and Roderick's been talking about almost seem intuitive. But you see, what's been happening is that a process has been going on over the past few decades, and oddly, we may not have noticed it. So I want you to look around the room right now, at your home or at your office, and compare that in your mind with what you had back in the 80s or the 90s. Now, I want you to take particular notice of what's missing. Stuff like Rolodexes, address books, road maps, answering machines, VHS tapes, CDs, DVDs, and lots more. What's happened is that these things have been replaced by, a smartphone, an app on a smartphone. What's happened is that digital has dematerialized the world, and these things that people need really are no longer dependent on the physical items. So their needs are completely satisfied by this digital representation. So this actually is what's driving this thing you keep hearing about, digital transformation. So data is now becoming the thing of value. So, okay, fine. What does that have to do with data privacy? Well, guess what? Digital has also dematerialized us people. So what's now is that we are now represented by a collection of individual pieces of data. This is what we call PII, or personally identifiable information. Now, not to get too philosophical this morning, but consider that, all of you have a physical self, this touchy-feely stuff, but also a digital self. And if you think about it, there should really only be one version of each. And both are vulnerable to, attack and damage and compromise, which, the results, of course, can be quite devastating. But then some people say, well, so what? Well, guess what? This digital town square is where all of the action is taking place today. business transactions, social interaction. So it's really not practical to believe that you can just stay out of it. The problem we have, and I think this is really the crux of the matter, is that common sense ethical practices that govern our privacy in the physical world have really not translated or been transferred into digital. So personal privacy, it really has taken on a new shape in the digital space. And that's because you're not moving this physical material around in space anymore, but rather manipulating bits and bytes, which now compose a person. In other words, privacy can more be easily bypassed because you don't even think about it. So let's just drive this home. So I'm going to just go through a little thought experiment with everybody. Consider this. No, please don't put the poll up. So, please consider this. Your house, say, is in a neighborhood experiencing a serious uptick in crime, right? Lots of break-ins happening, muggings going on down the road. But you've been safe, but you realize that you need to improve your security because you have lots of valuable stuff in your house. So you start by installing bars on the windows, but you figure that you can wait to bar up the doors until you get some more money, down the track. So life goes on. Then you have some family from country come to live with you, right? And they will bring with them all of their possessions. Everything is fine until one day, you're away, there's a break-in. And the entry came through some unused window around the back that you didn't even remember you had. All of your possessions are stolen. All of your auntie possessions are stolen. And what's worse is they get mugged and kidnapped and held for ransom. Your aunt had the assumption of safety when she came to stay with you. And as an owner of your household, it is your responsibility and not anybody else in your employment to make sure that you have done everything to protect her. So this, thought experiment really is an analog for what's happening with data and why security and privacy really is a matter to be driven by business leadership. When somebody messes with your, the data in your care, you should really have the same visceral response as if somebody put their hand in your pocket and took your wallet. So today, what we want to be going through are, some of the risks we are facing, some of my thoughts on why companies seem to still remain vulnerable to attack, and then of course, finally, what you can do about that. So, okay, with that fresh in our minds, then can you just put up the poll question again for me, please? Is that possible? Yes. It's a simple little question. Don't take no time to answer it, please. Data privacy, is it the same? Data privacy and data security, are they the same things? Yes, no, don't know. Just click. I'll give you another few seconds to do so. Easy choices. All right. All right. So then, can you go ahead and close the poll and then let's see what okay, good. So this is really showing that, you guys have been really paying attention to what Roderick was saying. And Brian, can you go to the next slide? Yeah. Really what this is about is, I guess the short answer, which most of you got, is no. Data privacy is not the same thing. And what we try to do is sort of represent it as a Venn diagram here. But they're very much related, which is why some people think that, yeah, they're the same. Data privacy is around protecting data, and it's achieved by focusing on three main things, right? Confidentiality, ensuring confidentiality. That means no unauthorized persons can access the data. Only authorized persons can access your data. Integrity. This means that there are no unauthorized changes. And if there are authorized changes, only authorized persons can do so. And integrity now also means that there's no loss or corruption of the data either. And finally, availability. And this is really where we talk about a resilient infrastructure that's resistant to failure. So your data is always available when it's needed. And if there ever is a disruption, then it's recoverable in the shortest possible time. So, okay, so that's the data side, and it's really driven by technology. Well, consider this. If you have authorized access to my personal data, does that mean that you can do anything you want with it? No, right? That's where the privacy part kicks in. So privacy is around protecting the rights of the individual, to their personal information. These are going to be things that are business obligations to abide by the rights of the individual and their right to be able to access and determine what you do with their data. These are types of things really that are defined by policies in the business and procedures in the business, which Roderick alluded to, that the Act is saying that you need to have these in place. So, but also you'll see where they overlap is really where data or technology and the policies come together. And I don't want to spend long on this, but really it's things like retention. How long do you need to keep the data? That's defined by some policy, but really it's some technology that enables you to determine and live up to that policy or that decision. Similarly with remediation, being able to recover that data in the event of a breach. So what I'm going to ask, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so what this is showing here is in order for you to even have a ghost of a chance of complying with those things that we've been speaking of so far, is that you really need to take an inventory of the data you have. So there are going to be some questions that you need to be asking from a management level to your various department heads. And the results of these questions that you can see here will greatly inform you as to the risk the company is carrying. And such an exercise is absolutely necessary in order for you to respond to a simple data subject request, which is like, tell me what data you have on me and how long you have it and why do you have it. So, questions like asking your department heads, what data do we hold? Whose data do we hold? Why are we holding it? Where can I find it? How are we protecting it? And so on, must be asked and answered. And what you're seeing here now is the actual scope and complexity of the matter. And that's just on the privacy side. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is really kind of stretch you out and start to look at some of the risks on the security side. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, what this is showing you are the global costs of cybercrime, including things like damages and destruction of data, stolen money, lost productivity, theft of intellectual property, theft of personal and financial data, embezzlement, fraud, the cost of forensic investigations, restoration and deletion of hacked data, restoration of systems, plus a reputational harm that's done to the brand. And you can see that the frequency seems to be, increasing, and the severity seems to be increasing from a low of 3 trillion in 2015, and it's doubled here in 2021. And if you looked at it in terms of the wealthiest economies in terms of GDP, it will be the third richest economy above Japan. And look at where it's going or projected to grow till 2025, 10 trillion. What's happening is that the criminal organizations are coming together to do this. It is literally the greatest transfer of wealth from one set of individuals to others. Can you go to the next slide? So, this is something that it's all in the media here now. You hear a lot of, and it's ransomware. It's a particular type of extortion done by criminals. Basically, it's a digital mugging, where they use some mechanism, to deliver malware. Think of malware like the gun or the knife, because this is the thing that inflicts the damage or the harm to the business. So ransomware is extremely popular. Why? Because it offers the criminal the least risk for the greatest gain, the biggest payoff. Obviously, in the physical world, a physical mugging, the guy has a greater chance of getting caught or even hurt. Whereas in the digital space, you can't see him or you can't find him. What you'll see from this is that the frequency of the attacks are increasing from one every 2 minutes. This is worldwide in 2015, and you see here now in 2021, every 11 seconds. What's also notable is the costs are increasing, or the severity is also increasing. Or, in 2015, 325 million, and it's over 20 billion in 21. And look at where it's going in by, in 10 years' time. Okay. So how is all of this really happening? What happens is that because ransomware has such a big payoff for little risk, what the bad guys are doing are effectively creating these marketplaces where ransomware or malware is created, and a ransomware campaign around that malware is also created. And you can go to the marketplace, if you're a bad guy, check it out, and run your campaign, release your campaign on the world. And the proceeds of your evil deeds are also facilitated within the marketplace. Whether it be selling of goods that you've stolen, and by the way, credit cards on the dark web are only carrying a value of less than $1 now. But the things such as personal data, the medical records, things like that are carrying much higher and higher value. Credit cards, what happens is that the banks are doing a pretty good job on stopping that fraud. So it's having less and less value. Plus, the medical records is what we call rich data. It's much harder to recover that kind of thing. So there's a much higher value in the black market. So really what you have happening now is this thing we call ransomware as a service. The same things that we've been using in the regular world with as a service, as a means of lowering your upfront cost and lowering the need of particular expertise in order to get the gain of the thing, is being used by the bad guys. Same concept. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing this accelerating. One of the things I would like you guys to take away is that you can't hide. It is very, very reasonable to assume that this will happen. If it's not already happened to you, it is happening here in Jamaica. It's just that it's not being reported, and we'll get to that in a second. Can you go to the next slide, please? So what I wanted to show here is some of the vulnerabilities that organizations have in terms of ransomware. This was a survey done by a number of MIS, MIS managers over a few thousand companies. And what they're saying that the entry point for the delivery of this malware is via spam and phishing emails. We kind of know this, right? Basically, any of these touch points that the end user to the internet is what they go after. So, spam and phishing emails are primary, and I'll talk a little bit later on this. The next thing too is, poor user practices, gullibility we call it, and it's people take shortcuts in making decisions, and often that leads to poor decisions. So there is a general lack of, adequate security training within the organizations. And then some of the other ones that you see there, weak passwords, open RDP, remote desktop protocols, through the networks, believe it or not, they're still there. That thing that we call clickbait, those are those things, I'm sure you've seen it on social media, where you are enticed by some sensational story, some giveaway that you hear about. You're enticed to click so that malware can be delivered to you. So these are some of the things that that the bad guys, some of the methods that the bad guys are using to get at you. Thanks. I can go to the next slide. So why are we vulnerable? We know these things, but why are we vulnerable? The attacks from these guys are relentless. Everybody has antivirus or some other protection in place, but the data is showing that there is still great success by these criminals. So something else is happening. Something else is being overlooked. And, so what are they? So next slide there, right? All right, so I bet no one thought I would put this up as one of the vulnerabilities. But in our experience, what we have found is that there's a lagging awareness that cybercrime is an existential threat that can end you. And one of the things as well is that the level of board sponsorship is lacking. The board, or from the senior most levels, that's what will drive the operational changes necessary to a security and a privacy by design culture throughout the organization. The other things too is that there seems to be an inadequate amount of funding and resources. One of the things to understand is that security is a different skill set from your IT infrastructure manager, and security practitioners are in very scarce and in very high demand here now. So there has to be some amount of talent management that's going on to bring in the requisite skills into the organization. And of course, the requisite funding for security initiatives. All of this we've found is leading to the sort of triage approach to security, where the security officers have to make some choices as to what's most priority now. We believe that is an inadequate approach, because it's not a fact that you plug that hole when there's another hole over there and the boat is sinking. So let's just use back to our home metaphor that we used earlier. You have 10 windows in the house. You can get enough funds to secure 3, and you'll do the other ones next year. Are you safe? Are you satisfied with that approach? I don't think that's adequate. Next slide, please. One of the other things that has really changed and has made us even more vulnerable is that there have been some new ways in which we operate now. And what has been happening is that we are still using some old approaches to secure us in this new paradigm. And one of the things, of course, is this work from home. And work from home, thanks to COVID, it was really a disruptive event. And many companies and their security teams had to go and make some changes almost overnight. Not that we haven't been saying these things for the longest time, but things happen and then you're forced to do something. And what happened is that it has changed and opened up the security and the attack surface of the company. What this little diagram is showing you is what once was the castle, where all of your jewels and your staff lived and operated, was surrounded by a moat, a firewall that kept the bad guys out and the good guys in. The thing is now, as we mentioned earlier, is that the network, the internet, is now your corporate network. I'm at home. I'm accessing applications in the cloud. I'm accessing my applications on premises within the organization, but using the internet to get in. So what this is meaning is that your good guys have left the building and they're dwelling among the bad guys, or should I say bad guys are dwelling among you. And you can't tell who is who. You'll see that one of the things that we're using to gain access to the office is this thing called VPN. I don't want to beat up on VPN too much, but what it is, it's your front door. And all you're saying to everybody, here's my front door, knock, and let me ask you who you are, and if you pass, then I'll let you in. The thing is that the issues here is that even if you have the proper credentials, you could be on a compromised endpoint, which will carry the compromised laptop, which will carry the infection into the organization. You need to move to a different approach for that, and a different concept for that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the key thing is that we are still using an older approach for a paradigm that has changed. You can go to the next slide. So this is about, these large attack surfaces that we have. There are many more devices that we as individuals have. I have 5 devices, laptop, tablet, phone, extra phone, all of these things, and all of them are connected. All of them can connect to the network. Any one of them can get compromised. So it's about, do you even know what you have connected to your network? So we really need to start to consider things completely differently. The other thing too is this thing of zero-day attacks. The zero-day really is about, this is something new I've never seen before, so I don't know, I don't recognize the pattern, and hence it defeats my defenses. There's an approach that you need to take with these zero-day attacks, which really is to utilize some type of sandbox. For any traffic coming into the organization is detonated in the sandbox outside. And there are other methods as well that we don't need to talk about here. We'll talk about later in more detail. The other thing too, guys, is this thing about every company I've ever worked for had a fire drill or earthquake drill, a rally point set up outside where everybody goes to in case there's some event, disruptive event that happens. How many of you have a security incident action plan? And note that, as Roderick had mentioned, you have a 72-hour window to report an incident. So that is not the time to go figure out what to do. You need to have a plan in place. All right, so can you go to the next slide? Okay, so, everybody should be feeling a little uncomfortable right now. So I want you to just take a breath. Your best fighting chance is to have a plan, a framework, a methodology backed by some solid products and services, in order to address these vulnerabilities. So the good news really is that I'm going to show you that right now. Okay, so go to the next slide, Rob, please. All right. So this is a framework that we recommend that everybody uses. I'm going to go through it in a minute. But for it to work, it's assumed that you address the first vulnerability that I mentioned earlier. Leadership culture, the C-suite need to be involved. It's pivotal to the success of this. Unfortunately, I can't help you with that, but I'm assuming you'll get that sorted. Again, the first thing to recognize or remember is that the cyber criminal attacks are relentless. They will keep coming at you again and again because they're trying to find some new blind spot that you never knew you had. So the top of the framework is what we talk about in like preventing things, bad things from happening. And that means by, first of all, predicting, where the next attack is going to come from. That means understanding your vulnerabilities, right? Having an asset inventory, both in terms of data and non-data assets. Okay, we spoke to that earlier about those questions of where is my data, what is my data, and to prepare some type of baselines of what I have. So I know when I add something new, I know what the new baseline is. But it's very important that you keep looking where are these vulnerabilities, because those are the most likely avenues of attack. Then you need to move now to the prevent side, which is about hardening what you have and plugging those holes that you've identified, being able to isolate your operations into segments so that which limits the blast radius in the event that there is some intrusion. And of course, as I mentioned, you need to be able to reduce that attack surface, lessen the places and the points where they can come in on you. Good. So the next thing now on the bottom line is about, okay, the getting, okay, what you're going to do now. So the next part now, starting from the right, detecting, you have to be able to detect when there has been a breach. You need to contain it. That's the containing that blast radius again, and prioritize what you're going to remediate first. Okay. And then as you move across now, responding is, investigating how that breach occurred and how to remediate, and then to design in a change, which will then plug the hole that they obviously took advantage of. So in the middle, you see this thing that we talk about, continuous monitoring and assessment. Continuously looking for where that next vulnerability is, learning from what you have done and taking appropriate actions to inform the other parts of the network. So again, I'm hoping this is demonstrating the scope of the issues and why C-level attention really is necessary to drive these operational changes that really have to be backed by some good solutions. What I'm going to ask, can you just move to the next slide? Okay, so that's the framework. What I'm showing you here, and this is my last slide, what I'm showing you here are 8 of the key areas that if you address these areas, you have the best fighting chance to stave off an attack from the outside. And really, it's again around securing the user and the data wherever it may be. Now, one of the first ones is you see there about securing email. As you saw, spam and phishing mails are the primary tool that the bad guys use to deliver their malware. And typically that's done, you get an email, it looks like a legitimate mail, but it has some link in it, which is weaponized. They do some very tricky things where they will send up the mail in and the link is, points to a benign site. And then 10 minutes later, after they've sent the mails out, they make a change to the site or change to the URL so that it now points to a malicious site. And what that does, it typically defeats, your primary firewall or your mail filtering, because it sees the initial mail as benign. So you need something to deal with that. And typically that's done by rewriting the URLs. And those are technical details that we can talk about at another time. Next, you need to secure that internet. This is a primary means by which data flows into and out of the organization through the user. So, and as of course, the corporate network is now the internet, both inbound and outbound traffic really must be secured. So, and no guys, antivirus and personal firewalls may not be the sufficient. They are easily bypassed by these more advanced techniques. So really what you need to be doing is looking at the specific traffic as it goes in and out of the organization. We talk on that some more. Then there's this thing that we call the remote access. Now, I said before, you really need to look at ditching the VPN because it's a 30-year-old approach to a problem that has fundamentally changed. We would use VPN to access our office's network from elsewhere on a periodic basis. I'm traveling, I need to get at some files or some stuff on my network, and I need to connect and stay there for, maybe an hour, couple of hours, periodically. What's happened is because of work from home, we now have most or a large fraction of our staff outside of the network, and they are making these permanent connections all day long through the front door. And what we're saying is that the bad guys know is our access point, and they're hammering that front door to find a way in. What you really need to be doing and thinking about is going to a zero trust. I trust nothing but verify. Everything goes dark so that the bad guys can't attack what they can't see. Then now the next thing, of course, as I'd mentioned earlier in the framework, is that looking at that continuous monitoring and patch management. The malware, once it's introduced into the organization, it takes advantage of some vulnerability that's existing on your network. And what we found, especially look at things like WannaCry, that one, which was I think was a $4 billion in damages around the world. That what it was taking advantage of a vulnerability for which a patch was released many months earlier and was left undone for whatever reason within the organizations. So bad guys are looking to exploit vulnerabilities. So patching your operations is vital. Next, of course, as I said, it's the user who they're targeting and their behavior. And as I said, I mean, we're busy, and they are trying to take advantage of the overworked and busy guy just as much as the nonchalant and gullible ones. But it's because it's human nature to take shortcuts when making decisions, and that leads to poor decisions. So ongoing training of staff, not only new recruits, but the guys that have been there all along, has to be done. And this is what's building that security culture in the organization. Resilient operations, that speaks to the fact that as part of the requirements for data security is that my operations must be available. So it is talking to, your data centers, your networks, and so on, that they're always available in the event of a disruption. You can continue operations, and that the data is recoverable. You need to show these things as things that you're doing in the organization. The next point I will talk to is, of course, endpoint protection and data loss prevention. What this is really speaking to is the fact that the endpoint, laptop, what your mobile phone, what your end users are using to conduct their work, to perform their work, that can be compromised. And without an endpoint for them to do their work, they're down. And plus, this is a vector for bringing malware into the organization. So you need to be finding ways to be able to restore that endpoint back to its last known good operation. And also, these also are the points where data can be exfiltrated. And you need to be able to identify and prevent that from happening. And hence the data loss prevention. And finally, there is this thing that we call privileged access management. Malware, once introduced into your network, needs to escalate its privilege in order to do and perform its evil deeds, right? So the idea now is that privileged access management must be able to manage privilege and limit it by context and only provide it when it is needed. And these are some of the things that we, that we also recommend to our customers. Now, again, guys, there's just far too much to cover in all of this, and which is why I'm gonna take this opportunity to just mention that we will be conducting a series of seminars separate to this one, where we're going to take a deeper dive into each of these areas and to investigate and show you how these solutions work. Can you just go to the next slide there, Brian? Yeah. So I know I'm just encouraging you to go right now, to infoexchangejla.com and register for the internet access and secure private access. Sorry, I heard somebody. So internet access and secure private access seminar, which is on our Zscaler or in the local vernacular Zscaler product and service. And this is going to be talking about how to be securing your internet. Remember, the internet is now your corporate network. It's a given, can't run away from that. And then how to secure, that work from home. So October 13, guys, go ahead and register now. It's another free event. I will, for sake of time, just pause it there. Anne-Marie and team, thank you very much. Hope I scared people enough.
No, yes, it really is overwhelming, the amount of information that we need to process in order to ensure that we are ready and protected. I believe that one of our panelists has a comment. Rob Davis, I think. Rob?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay, I'm supposed to introduce myself, right?
That's right.
I'm Robert Davis. Yeah, I'm Robert Davis. I'm a director both of Info Exchange and Fraser, Fontaine Kong. David, I have most people, when they hear about ransomware and so forth, the question that always comes certainly to me is that, but I have my backups already. If someone encrypts my data, my live data, I have my backups. Why? Please tell me a little bit more about that. Why is it that that's not a solution?
Yeah, you notice that backups are getting hit. They're actually connected to the primary data source, yeah. And there's some mechanism that you have in place to automate the backups, right? And so the malware follows that path and hits the backup. In fact, if you remember Maersk, the shipping line, they got hit by a ransomware attack, and it took down their entire network worldwide, with the exception of one, which just happened to be having a power cut. And that's what protected them. The malware couldn't get to that network. So what it does, it follows the path. I don't know if if that's sufficient for you, or if you want more technical dive into it, in which case we could ask our esteemed CIO to chime in on that. I don't know if he's...
Andel, do you want to add anything more to that?
Well, we could add that it is important that you consider that if you have a backup, then that backup needs to be immutable, meaning that you need to back up to a place where that data cannot be changed, because most of our backups today, we're either backing up to secondary storage, which is easily accessible, as David said, or we're backing up to some external source, which is also connected. So once they have credentials for on-premise, you find that most persons use the same credentials off-premise, or the credentials are stored or connected to the on-premise credentials, and hence they have easy access to it. And because of that, they can also encrypt the external store. So what you want is to make sure that when you're doing backups, you're doing at least one of your backups is to storage that is immutable, meaning that cannot be changed, cannot be altered, and therefore ransomware can't affect it.
Okay.
Can that be automated? That's my final question.
Yes, that can be automated, and we have solutions for that.
Okay, wonderful. Let's just keep these panelists up. There is another question here. We kind of answered it a little bit, but let's just go into it. Are you saying that VPN, this is coming from Ryan, are you saying that VPN connections are no longer safe? And if yes, what is the modern solution?
You want to take that one down?
We won't go as far as saying that VPN connections are not safe. What we will say is that there are better methods of actually providing remote access. So if you look back at 2020 and you just scan the news, do a search in Google, you will find that VPN was one of the major sources of actually breaches and avenues for breach. Colonial Pipeline, VPN credentials compromised. So you really have to look at, do you still want to put users on the network, or do you want to, or is your intention to connect those users to their applications? And really and truly, when you look at it, it's really about connecting users to applications and not to the network. And therefore, if it's connecting users to the applications, then why do they need to be actually on the network if you can connect them to the applications without them being on the network? So there are now more advanced means of actually doing that. And that is why David spoke about secure remote access using a zero trust network access framework. And basically what that is to say, hey, what? I'm not going to trust. I'm always going to verify, meaning that you have to identify yourself. And not only that, I'm going to connect you only to the resources that you need access to. I'm not going to connect it to the network, only to the applications that you need access to. And I'm going to do so in a way that you're no longer on the network. And hence, if something is happening at home, at the coffee shop, on your endpoint, that means what I have done is to limit what the bad guy has access to. And that's it. As simple as
Okay. I'm going to recommend to Ryan that he signs up for that deep dive session.
We'll cover that.
Yes, that's specifically one of the areas that will be covered. And final question, and I'm going to throw this over to Rob because you are operating at a very senior level, so you're probably the best person to answer this. Debbie is asking, how can we sell to the leadership culture of small organizations who believe they have had no incident, so everything is okay? And in-house IT can manage with basic protect wares? That's a very good question, which we hear quite often.
All right. Well, my favorite saying is the only thing worse than bad news is bad news late. All right. So, everybody, when you look at the places that have been hacked, you're looking at, massive companies, banks within Jamaica, Amazon, Google. All of these people thought that they were protected. They didn't think that they were exposed. They thought they were protected. And one of the things now is that it's not a matter of if. Roderick said it actually. It's not a matter of if, but when, right? And you need to do everything you can do to protect yourself. So you're living in a time where things are changing, and the actual things that you have in place and you're depending upon and you're comfortable about should no longer be taken as a source of comfort. You need to change with the time because the threat itself is changing, and it does have to be from the top. A company's culture always comes from the top, from the board of directors or the managing director or the general manager, if that's a person who runs things day to day. So that it has to come from the top, and the top needs to recognize that there's an issue and they need to address it. And specifically to your question of someone who has a company that has never been hacked, the fact that you've never been hacked yesterday doesn't mean that you won't be hacked today or tomorrow by a new threat.
Yeah,
You know,
it is regrettable that often you have to be, hurt before you make that move. I can only say that, does a continuous knocking on that door sometimes is what is required. Just continuous education. Sometimes it's those below that have to educate those above.
I would, if you mind, I would just also say to that person is just refer to them that, there's a ransomware attack every 11 seconds. And that has changed from every 2 minutes a few years ago. And it's just increasing and increasing, or should I say getting smaller and smaller. At the time it was getting smaller and smaller. So it's literally, you've been lucky. And consider that it's a existential threat. You're done. So are they willing to take that risk for the cost of, a fraction of what it would cost in losing a business? Plain and simple.
Okay.
Just to make another point, Anne-Marie, just quickly, I think that, sometimes you see these very big figures for ransomware. I mean, Colonial Pipeline paid out $5 million for ransomware. JBS paid out $11 million. And you say, wow, that's a lot of money. But consider that those companies went through some decision-making process to actually pay that ransom, because the cost of the actual breach is actually much larger than the ransomware that was paid. And for the board of directors and the C-suite needs to understand that while the IT officers and the security officers are responsible, the board of directors and the C-suite are accountable. And at the end of the day, if something happens to the business where brand is damaged or you can't serve your customers, you're ultimately accountable. And therefore, it is definitely your duty to be interested in it and make sure that it is well funded.
All right, time is really up on top of us, but I do want to get to these last two questions. Michael is asking this question again. I suspect he didn't get the correct answer or adequate answer. He is asking, what is the advice for companies whose primary data are held in cloud SaaS and accessible from anywhere? And also, do you perform, Robert is asking, do you perform penetration tests? So Ondel, can I ask you to just answer Michael's, what's the advice for companies whose primary data are held in cloud SaaS and available from anywhere?
Okay, so when it comes to data privacy, that's an issue that you'll have to speak to your legal team about. But in short, if you're using cloud storage, you'd want it to be in a jurisdiction that is compatible to that of Jamaica when the act comes into force. And you'd have to figure out, am I storing personal information in that cloud storage, or it's not personal information? If it's not, then it does not fall under the act. In terms of just general security, if you're using cloud storage, then you need to make sure that only authorized accounts have access to it, and that it is not open to the public. I think we have seen lately certain breaches where it is actually open to the public, and therefore hackers were able to get to a portion of data because it was open to the public. So I would say, in short, make sure that only authorized users have access to your cloud storage. And when the act comes into play, you'd have to figure out whether or not data sovereignty issues come into play as to where it needs to be stored or where it can't be stored. And then for the other question, Anne-Marie, you said that the other question was about
performing penetration tests.
Performing penetration tests. Now,
do we do that?
Well, let us look at it this way. There are two things that you need to consider. One is, can someone get in? That's one question. But when you look at it, that is only one aspect of how the ransomware and the bad guys are actually entering your premises. If you notice, they're sending a spam or phishing email. Did they try and forcefully come in? No, they didn't. No. They're actually, on the web pages of CNN and BBC, and they're setting certain traps for you. And when you click on those ads, did they try and bore it? So therefore, we have to be very careful that we don't subscribe to saying, well, we're going to be doing penetration testing, and as long as we feel comfortable that they can't penetrate, then I can't be compromised. That is not true, because the bad guys have evolved beyond just trying to brute force their way in. Penetration testing is important, but only to the point where you're reducing your attack surface.
How do you guys protect your ports and capabilities from cyber attacks?
Wherever you may have a vulnerability, whether it's via email, whether it's via the internet, or it's on the endpoint, it's really about having the various security technologies in place and practices, as well as processes to defend against any attack. So the first thing that you want to do is to make sure that you keep the attackers off your premises, off your crown jewels. So that is why you have security around email. Don't let it get to the actual endpoint if it's malicious. Same thing for the internet. Don't let it get to the endpoint. If you can protect outside of your organization before it actually gets to where your crown jewels are, that is what you want to do. And then in the event that it lands on the actual asset that actually holds your crown jewels, that means your very valuable data, then you want to have proper endpoint detection and response in place, as well as other means of protecting that endpoint. So when we talk about how do we secure it, it's really around different technologies and different security layers that you have to put in place to protect yourself.
Right. Yeah, basically, I think I understand what he's asking. Basically, our approach really is you fight the fight outside of your premises. You don't want to fight the fight, in your backyard or inside your house. You want to fight it out there. So what you do is a lot of prevention. And then in the event that they get in, then you need to take action, like you indicated, on remediate. Yeah, but that's the approach, layered approach. Yeah.
Ondel, I don't know if this is a question for you. This is from Christopher. He's common denominator. Which back-end platforms get hacked most often? Microsoft, AS400, RISC, Unix, mainframe when settling cyber claims. I don't know if you or Najib.
Let us answer it this way, Andrea. David spoke about ransomware as a service. So therefore, what he spoke about is finding the weakest link. And it's really about that. So it's not about any specific technology. It could be even something as simple as a home device that is connected to the internet. We talk about operational technology. We talk about IoT. All our simple devices are now being connected to the internet. And if a particular hacker actually gets access to something like that and is connected to our network, then it could be the point of entry. So it's not about AS400. It's not about Windows. It's not about Unix. It's about what vulnerabilities have you identified or not identified, and the ones really and truly that you have not identified and patched are those avenues through which you will be hacked. So it's really about finding, first of all, knowing what do you have within your organization. So you need some form of asset management. Just like in the physical world, you had, the accounting people going around and said, well, that's my desk, that's my chair. The same thing you have to do in the IT world. You have to have IT asset management, so you know what is it that you have. And then you have to now take an inventory, a continuous inventory of what vulnerabilities those assets may have. And of course, do a risk-based prioritization of how am I going to patch it based on what is going on in the wider community in terms of security. So that is how you approach it. And someone asked about penetration testing. The problem that we have with penetration testing is that it's a point in time. And in the cybersecurity world, you find that Microsoft has patch Tuesdays, and different companies have different things that they talk about every week in terms of vulnerabilities coming out. So if you took a point in time and said, well, I've now patched my systems to that point in time. The next day, you now have another set of vulnerabilities. So David spoke about continuous monitoring and continuous patch management. That is what we believe in rather than just a point in time penetration test.
Oh, one last question that just came in from Levon. He says, as stated earlier, malware on endpoints can find their way onto a company's network through a VPN. Is there a way to segment employee access in an effort to limit vulnerabilities or risks? Or is it a case where once malware accesses the network, the entire network is compromised? Ondel, this sounds like a question for you.
There's a way to segment, and in our next segment of our cybersecurity seminar series, we will talk more about secure remote access. And basically what you'd have to do is to not let them onto the network in the first place. I think VPN has served us well, but the problem with VPN is that it actually extends the network to wherever that user is. So therefore, if you have 100 users working remotely, you have extended your network to 100 different locations. And therefore, the issues or the vulnerabilities or the different security environment that actually describes those 100 locations can actually affect you. So therefore, you may think that you're being secure, but what you have done is to extend your trust boundary out to 100 different places, and that's not good. So in our next presentation in our cybersecurity seminar series, we'll talk about how to do it in a way that even if the endpoint is compromised in such a secure remote such a remote access way, you can actually limit the blast radius just to the application, and not only just to the application, but you don't let them onto the network. Hence, if they try to ping, if they try to discover anything, then the bad guys aren't able to discover it. So different times, different technologies, making you work safer, working from anywhere. Okay. And just one other point, Henry, I think most companies are thinking, DPA not passed as yet, DPA 2 years away. Why do I care about security? Why should I care about privacy? It is very important to note that ransomware is happening today. Ransomware as a service is actually out there, where anyone, even without cyber attack skills, can actually go onto a platform and just say, find the weakest link. And if you're the weakest link, you're going to be the one that gets attacked. So security is something that all companies from the board level right down to the employee should be concerned about, because if an incident happens, you could be out of business. And then from privacy standpoint, if you have a situation where you're collecting my personal information or the personal information of your customers, then you do have a responsibility and are accountable if anything goes wrong, even before, at this stage, even before the DPA comes into effect. So when should you take action? Our opinion is now.
I want to back that up, Ondel, and remind everyone that the GDPR has taken effect since 2018. So you potentially have our diaspora in the US, in the UK, in other areas in the EU that are already doing business with you. So you do have those obligations to them. If they're not happy with how you've treated their data, they have rights now. So even though our DPA is following on your obligations and the mindset, the preparation, your infrastructure, it needs to change now. So I think that just reinforces on that. We had a discussion before in one of our internal sessions where you actually did make that point as well. So I want to, reinforce it.
Henry, I'd just like to just to reinforce this a little bit for people who are thinking, oh, I can wait. Me, like most Jamaicans, I'm afraid of dog, right? Think of the data security issues as the bad dog right at your foot, about to bite you. And in my mind, what is worse than one bad dog biting you? Two. The second one is this DPA app that's running up the road coming after you. You need to deal with the dog at your foot and deal with the other one that is coming. So there's no point of delay, no reason for delay.